I never thought the most painful words of my life would be spoken at my own dining table, by my own son. We were gathered for the Sunday dinner I had prepared for 35 years. Please listen closely, because this story takes a turn you'll never see coming. My name is Emilio Herrera, and I'm 67 years old. For my entire life, I believed I had built something solid, a united family, a home filled with love, and a legacy to be proud of. On that Sunday evening in March, my world fell apart with a single phrase. It was an ordinary night. I had prepared the paella my son, Álvaro, loved so much. My wife, Dolores, had set the table with the embroidered cloth from my mother, and my daughter-in-law, Silvia, had brought dessert. Everything seemed perfect. But I noticed something was off as soon as Álvaro walked through the door. There was a coldness in his eyes I had never seen before. Fermentation during dinner, the conversation felt forced. Dolores talked about the weather. Silvia mentioned her real estate job, but Álvaro stayed silent, pushing food around his plate. I tried to keep the mood light, telling jokes and asking about his week. That's when it happened. Álvaro dropped his fork with a metallic clang that echoed in the quiet kitchen. He looked me in the eyes and said with a chilling coldness, "You're here because it's your house, but not because you're welcome." Pamela that followed was deafening. Dolores froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. Silvia stared down at her plate. I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my chest. "What did you say?" I finally managed, wondering if my aging ears had failed me. "You heard me," Álvaro replied without blinking. "This house is technically yours, but that doesn't mean your presence is desired here." Wrestling Odin processed the words. This was the same boy who used to run to me when I got home from work, the same one who called me his hero. How could he possibly tell me I wasn't wanted? "Álvaro," Dolores said, her voice trembling. "Don't speak to your father like that." "No, Mom," he replied firmly. "It's time things got sorted out. Dad needs to understand things are going to change." I looked at Dolores, searching for answers, but she avoided my gaze. "What changes?" I asked, struggling to stay calm. "We'll discuss it," was all he said before getting up. "Silvia, we're leaving." And just like that, they were gone. I was left alone with a plate of paella I couldn't eat and 1,000 unanswered questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one where I had held a baby Álvaro, replaying every word. Had I done something wrong? Why hadn't Dolores defended me more? As the hours passed, my sadness turned into something else, a cold determination. I had built a company from scratch. I had survived economic crises. I wasn't going to just sit and wonder what was happening. On Monday morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to find the truth behind his cruel words. Álvaro had said things would change, and I was going to find out exactly what that meant. I decided to confront Dolores. I found her in the kitchen, making breakfast as if nothing had happened. She wore her favorite blue robe, but there was a tension in her shoulders. "Dolores," I said firmly, "we need to talk." She didn't look up. "About what?" she asked. "About what our son said last night, and about why you didn't seem surprised." She stopped what she was doing. Her hands trembled as she put a coffee mug down. She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I knew this moment would come," she whispered. "What moment? What are you talking about?" She sat down in the chair opposite me. "Álvaro came to see me 3 weeks ago," she said. "He was talking about plans, about the future, about things I didn't want to hear. Our race." "What kind of plans?" "He thinks we're too old to manage all this." She gestured around the kitchen. "He says it would be better if we divided the assets now, before it's too late." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My son was planning to divide up my estate while I was still alive and perfectly healthy. "And what did you say?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. Dolores covered her face. "I refused at first. I told him this was our home. But he kept insisting, every day. He called me in the mornings when you were out walking, in the afternoons when you were in the workshop. He said it was just the smart thing to do." I felt like I was looking at a stranger. This woman I had shared a bed with for 42 years had been hiding secret conversations with our son about my future. "And Silvia?" I asked. Is she involved too? Idea initially, Dolores confessed. Real estate. The market. Comco Airmacy. She says this house is worth a lot more now. Everything started to make sense. This wasn't a sudden family crisis. It was a calculated financial plan designed by my daughter-in-law, executed by my son, with the silent complicity of my wife. How long have you been planning this? I asked, my voice calm despite the rage inside. Since January, she admitted. Silvia had Álvaro consult a lawyer who specializes in inheritance law. Accompaniedly, there are ways to fast-track asset division if all parties agree. Clear all parties? I interrupted. When was I going to be a party to this agreement? Encon's Álvaro said he'd explain it to you gradually, she said. Represent you the benefits. You could keep living here, but legally, the property would be divided between us three. The sheer coldness of the plan took my breath away. What about the savings, the retirement accounts, the investments I've been building for 30 years? Dolores closed her eyes. Everything, Emilio. LNG, the plan includes everything. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the garden, the same garden where I had taught Álvaro to play soccer. Are you on board with this? I asked without turning around. I don't know, Emilio. I'm so confused. Álvaro says it's for the best, that it will prevent future problems. The silence was my answer. Plunge anything else? I asked. Blackmail, Álvaro said, if you don't agree voluntarily, there are legal procedures. Procedures to have someone declared incapable of managing their own affairs. In that moment, I understood the full scope of their betrayal. This was a coup, carefully orchestrated against my life and autonomy. But a strange calm came over me. For 67 years, I had built my reputation as a strategic man. I wasn't about to be underestimated. Turbulence. Thank you for telling me the truth, Dolores, I said, finally turning back to her. At least now I know exactly where I stand. Remin. That earlier, while Dolores cried in our bedroom, I sat at my desk and began to make a list. If my family wanted to play a game of legal and financial strategy, they were about to discover they had picked the wrong opponent. The next few days were the most productive of my life. After 40 years in the textile business, I knew that details were everything. My experience was about to become my best weapon. I started by reviewing every financial document I had. Bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, investment certificates. Everything was organized, but now I looked at them with different eyes, searching for any suspicious movements. March 18, I made the first alarming discovery. My February bank statement showed 2 inquiries I hadn't authorized. Someone had requested information about my checking and savings accounts. The dates matched what Dolores had told me about Álvaro's secret visits. I called the bank immediately. After identifying myself, the manager Antonio Vega, who had known me for 15 years, confirmed my suspicions. Mr. Herrera, he said, sounding uncomfortable. Your son came in with a power of attorney document signed by you. Wildfires, he said he needed the information to help you with your taxes. A power of attorney signed by me? My blood ran cold. Unprotected wings, we verified the signature against our records. It was a perfect match. I hung up the phone with a terrifying certainty. My own signature had been forged. Álvaro had gained access to confidential information using fraudulent documents. This was no longer just a family betrayal. It was a crime. That same afternoon, while Dolores was out, I went into the small study Álvaro used when he visited. We kept books and old files there. In the desk drawer, I found something that made my heart stop. Photocopies of all my personal documents. My passport, my driver's license, the deed to the house, my life insurance policies, even medical reports from recent checkups. Everything was there, neatly organized in a folder I didn't recognize. But the most disturbing thing was on the last page, a handwritten draft in Álvaro's writing. It was a detailed schedule. April, get independent medical evaluation. May, submit legal documents. June, initial asset transfer. July, final signature. My son had planned out the next 4 months of my life without my knowledge. I took pictures of every document with my phone, making sure not to disturb anything. If Álvaro was meticulously documenting his plot, I would do the same, dot dot dot. On Thursday morning, I decided to investigate further. I remembered Álvaro had mentioned lawyers, so I checked the call history on our landline. I found several numbers I didn't recognize. I looked them up online and found that two belonged to law firms specializing in family law and inheritance. I called the first one pretending to be a potential client interested in legal incapacitation. The secretary explained they had recently consulted with family members about protecting older adults. The second call was even more revealing. The lawyer Rodrigo Sanchez immediately recognized my last name when I introduced myself. "Oh, you must be Álvaro Herrera's father," he said. "Just here last week consulting about guardianship procedures." I hung up immediately. Now I had all the information I needed. My son had not only falsified documents, but had been actively seeking a legal path to have me declared incompetent. That night, as we ate dinner in silence, I watched Dolores. She was nervous and avoided my gaze. "How was your day?" I asked, as if nothing had happened. "Fine, normal," she replied quickly. "Did Álvaro call you today?" She visibly tensed. "No, why do you ask?" "Just curious," I said. Provoked. Had called. The landline log showed a 32-minute call that afternoon. On Friday, I took a bolder step. While Dolores was at her weekly medical appointment, I searched the house more thoroughly. In her dresser, I found a small notebook hidden among her clothes. The entries were in her handwriting and documented phone conversations with Álvaro over the past 5 weeks. There were dates, call summaries, and, most shockingly, a list of my daily routines, my walking schedule, doctor's appointments, and even my moods. My own wife had been spying on me. The last entry, dated the day before, chilled me to the bone. "Álvaro says he has everything prepared. Undermined, he'll talk to Dad directly. If he refuses, they'll go with Plan B. He says there's no turning back." I closed the notebook and put it back exactly where I had found it. Now I had physical evidence of the entire conspiracy. A strange sense of clarity came over me. All my life, I had faced complex business challenges. Now I was facing something similar, but with my own family. They had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That afternoon, I started drafting my own plan of action. If they had a schedule, I would have a better one. If they had consulted lawyers, I would consult better ones. They thought they could use my love for my family against me. They were about to discover that decades in the business world had taught me how to separate emotion from strategy when necessary. The war had begun, but they didn't know it yet. On Saturday, March 21st, I decided to expand my investigation. If this conspiracy was as elaborate as it seemed, I needed to know how far it reached. My first stop was my accountant, Fernando Castillo, who had handled my finances for 12 years. I went straight to the point. "Fernando," I said, "I need you to tell me honestly if anyone in my family has been asking about my finances." His expression immediately changed, confirming my suspicions. "Mr. Herrera," he began nervously, "your daughter-in-law, Silvia, came to see me 3 weeks ago. She said you had sent her for a summary of your assets." My stomach churned. "Wildfires, did you tell her?" "I refused at first, of course. You had signed an authorization. Received you had a consequota and knew specific details about your investments that only you could know. The information Álvaro had stolen to convince my own accountant to betray me. What information did you give her?" Mujer's his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "A full summary of your assets. Properties, bank accounts, your pension plan, your old business stock. Everything." "Everything?" I asked, the sense of betrayal deepening. "Yes, sir." Discontent, I also explained the investment structure and gave her updated valuations. She didn't just have general information. She had every precise detail of my financial situation. After leaving the accountant's office, I went to see my doctor, Dr. Mendoza. If their plan involved a medical evaluation, I needed to know. "Mendoza," I said during what seemed like a routine checkup, "my family called you asking about my health?" His reaction was immediate. "Your son called me last week, yes. Know about your cognitive ability and general health." "But Baba, what did you tell him?" Buffering, I explained I couldn't provide any medical information without your explicit permission. Investigators, he insisted he was worried about some recent episodes of confusion you'd supposedly been having. "Episodes of confusion?" I repeated, incredulous. Yes. Uzbeka, he mentioned you'd been forgetting important conversations and showing signs of disorientation. The audacity left me speechless. He wasn't just gathering medical information, he was fabricating symptoms to build a case against me. Doctor, I said, Wilmington now examined me just last month. Did you see any signs of cognitive decline? Absolutely none, Mr. Herrera. Unreliable. Your cognitive functions are perfectly normal for your age. Kwong, in fact, your mental agility is better than many patients 20 years younger. I now understood the full strategy. Álvaro was systematically building a file to justify a declaration of incompetence. He had falsified documents, stolen financial data, consulted lawyers, and was now trying to build a fake medical history. A surprise visit to Silvia's real estate office. She was the true architect of this plan. When I arrived, the receptionist told me she was on the phone. While I waited, I heard fragments of her conversation. The process is further along than we thought. The valuation on the main property is excellent. We should accelerate the timeline. Con. When she came out to greet me, her surprise confirmed my visit was not welcome. Emilio, she said with a forced smile, what a surprise to see you. Cried at a nearby cafe. I kept the conversation casual, talking about the real estate market. She responded enthusiastically, providing specific details about valuations in our neighborhood. But what shocked me was her precise knowledge of my property. Square footage, year of construction, even details about the heating system. Done some thorough research on the properties around here, I commented casually. It's my job, she replied, avoiding my gaze. Kong, you even know specific details about my house. Jervis, well, it's one of the most iconic properties in the area. Kong, it's natural I would have studied it. Spumming it for what exactly? The silence that followed was more telling than any confession. She quickly excused herself, claiming an urgent appointment. That night, back at my desk, I created a mental map of the whole conspiracy. Álvaro was the emotional executor. Silvia was the financial strategist. Dolores was the inside informant. They had infiltrated my entire professional circle. But they had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated me. I had faced ruthless competitors and disloyal partners before. This situation, while personally painful, was no different from a strategic standpoint. The war was on, and they were about to discover that experience and wisdom were my most powerful weapons. On Monday, March 23rd, I decided it was time to move from defense to offense. I had spent the weekend analyzing all the information, and now I needed professionals to help me protect what I had built. My first call was to Sebastian Morales, a lawyer specializing in estate planning whom I had met years ago. Sebastian had a reputation for being discreet and loyal. I laid out the entire situation for him, showing him the photos of the documents I had found and detailing the schedule they had made. Sebastian listened, taking notes. Mr. Herrera, he said finally, what you're describing constitutes several serious crimes: forgery, fraudulent access to confidential information, and most concerning, the preparation of an incapacitation proceeding without medical grounds. What are my options? I asked. Multiple, he replied. We can file criminal charges. Hypothetical, we can get immediate restraining orders to protect your assets. And most importantly, we can preempt any legal moves they might be planning. Sebastian explained we could implement what he called preventive asset shielding. This included setting up legal structures for my properties and creating medical documentation to certify my mental capacity. How long will that take? I asked. For closure, we can have everything legally protected in 2 weeks. They won't be able to touch anything, even if they get a temporary declaration of incompetence. I authorized him to proceed immediately. My second stop was a clinical psychologist, Dr. Jimenez. If Álvaro planned to question my mental capacity, I needed irrefutable documentation to prove otherwise. I explained the situation, and for the next 3 hours, she gave me an exhaustive battery of tests. The results were conclusive. My scores were well above average for my age group. She assured me I would have a full report in 2 days. That afternoon, I visited my sister Amelia. She had worked as a judicial secretary for 30 years and knew the legal system better than most lawyers. Emilio, she said after hearing the whole story, if Álvaro gets an incapacitation order, even a temporary one, he can make binding decisions about your estate before you can reverse the process. What do you recommend? I asked. Talk you need to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously: legal, financial, and familial. You also need evidence they are acting in bad faith. She suggested I record future conversations with Álvaro and Dolores, which was legal in my own home. It would provide irrefutable evidence of their true intentions. You should also change all your banking passwords, she added. If they forged your signature once, they could do it again. On Tuesday, I went to my bank. I met with the general manager, Antonio Vega, who had known me for 15 years. I told him about the forged document and the fraudulent access to my accounts. He took the matter seriously. We set up a special protocol requiring direct phone verification for any transactions related to my accounts. He also suggested I open a new account at a different branch and transfer most of my liquid savings there, leaving only minimal funds in the original accounts. On Wednesday, I received an unexpected call from Esperanza Ruiz, Dolores' sister. Emilio, she said, Dolores called me yesterday. She was so upset. She told me Álvaro is pressuring her to support some legal action against you. This was a breakthrough. Dolores wasn't an enthusiastic conspirator. She was a victim of emotional manipulation. Esperanza, I said, would you be willing to talk to her about this? Of course, she said. I'm planning to visit you next week. Help her see things from a different perspective. Tangled, I completed the last element of my defensive strategy. I hired a private investigator, Gabriel Herrera. Mr. Herrera, Gabriel explained, we can investigate your son and daughter-in-law's recent activities, phone calls, legal consultations, personal finances, even their digital communications if necessary. I authorized a discreet but thorough investigation. I needed to know exactly what other moves they had made. That night, as I reviewed all the documents and contracts I had signed, I realized I had accomplished something fundamental. I had gone from being a vulnerable target to someone protected by multiple layers of legal and financial defense. I was no longer reacting to their moves. I was anticipating them and setting my own rules. Álvaro's timeline said April would be the month of the medical evaluation, but when he got to that point, he would find me with irrefutable medical documentation, complete legal protection, and solid evidence of all his fraudulent activities. The defensive phase of my strategy was complete. Now it was time to go on the offensive. On Monday, March 30th, I received news that completely changed the balance of power. My private investigator, Gabriel Herrera, had found information that exceeded my worst expectations. Mr. Herrera, he said when we met, you need to sit down for this. Please. Bank statements and phone call transcripts on his desk. Your daughter-in-law, Silvia, has been organizing this operation for longer than we thought. We found evidence she started researching your assets more than 6 months ago. He showed me screenshots of online searches she had performed about guardianship proceedings and inheritance law. Gabriel continued, we discovered Silvia has significant debts she has been hiding from your son. Untreated. What kind of debts? Forging heavily in a failed real estate project, then $165,000 to several private investors. The payments were due in January, and her creditors are pressing hard. Everything made perfect sense. Silvia wasn't motivated by family concern or smart planning. She was desperate to pay off debts that had put her own solvency at risk. Does Álvaro know about these debts? I asked. Apparently not. Has kept him completely in the dark about her real financial situation. Gabriel then handed me the most shocking document, a transcript of a phone call between Silvia and one of her creditors. If I can't get access to those assets by May, Silvia had said, I'll have to declare bankruptcy. My father-in-law has properties worth over $500,000 that are just sitting there. He's an old man living with his wife with no real capacity to manage all that wealth. Reading her words was like a punch to the gut. She had turned my family, my home, and my legacy into a business transaction to solve her own financial problems. There's more, Gabriel added. Álvaro isn't in the financial position he pretends to be. Salting business has been losing clients. His income is down almost 40%. The full picture was coming into focus. This wasn't a carefully planned scheme for my well-being. It was a desperate operation by two people with serious money problems who had decided to use my wealth as a solution. That afternoon, I returned home to an unexpected surprise. My sister-in-law, Esperanza, had arrived, just as she promised. She was sitting in the kitchen talking to Dolores, and the tension between them was palpable. "Emilio," Esperanza said, "we need to talk together about what's going on." For the next 2 hours, Esperanza applied the pressure I had been unable to. As a younger but more determined sister, she got Dolores to confess details she had hidden from me. Álvaro told me if I didn't cooperate, he and Silvia would move far away and I would never see my grandchildren again, Dolores admitted through tears. "What grandchildren?" Esperanza asked sharply. "They don't have kids." "Prejudice. The ones they want to have in the future," Dolores mumbled. "Álvaro said they wanted to start a family, but they needed financial stability first." Espines and I exchanged glances. He had used the promise of future grandchildren to emotionally manipulate his mother. "Dolores," Esperanza said firmly, "do you realize they are using your own dreams against you to rob your husband?" That's when Dolores broke down completely. Sobbing, she confessed she had felt for weeks that something was terribly wrong, but was too scared to go against Álvaro. "Crown, he also scared me when he said they could have Emilio declared incompetent," she whispered. "I know your mind works perfectly fine, but he insisted it was just a precaution." Esperanza got up, indignant. "Dolores, your son is planning to destroy his own father's life to solve money problems. How can you even consider supporting something like that?" In that conversation, I gained an unexpected ally. My wife was a victim of manipulation, just like I was. On Tuesday, April 7, I received a call from Sebastian Morales. "Mr. Herrera, we've completed all the asset shielding. Your assets are now protected under a legal structure that makes unauthorized access impossible." What does that mean exactly? In Quano, it means that even if they get a temporary declaration of incompetence, they can't touch any of your properties, bank accounts, or investments without a full legal proceeding that would take years. Also looked into the lawyers Álvaro had consulted. Acompanha. They're good professionals, but they're working with incomplete and false information. Hey, find out their client lied about your mental capacity and family situation, they'll probably withdraw from the case. On Wednesday, I implemented the next phase of my strategy, the controlled confrontation. It was time for Álvaro to know that I knew everything, but without revealing the full extent of my countermeasures. I called him. "Álvaro," I said calmly, "I think we should have a serious conversation about the future. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon?" "What do you want to talk about, Dad?" he asked cautiously. "The changes you mentioned at dinner. Clarence Inc., it's time you explained exactly what you have in mind." I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "Okay, around 6. With Dolores and Esperanza as witnesses, I discreetly set up a recording device in the living room. Everything Álvaro said would be on the record. On Thursday, as I waited for him, I went over all my advantages. Full legal protection, evidence of his fraudulent activities, certification of my mental capacity, recovered allies, and information about Silvia's secret debts. And now, the ability to document any new lies or threats. When Álvaro arrived, he carried a folder of documents and a look of artificial determination. He sat in the same spot where I had taught him to read. He began seriously. "Silvia and I have been studying your financial situation. Liu, we believe there are important optimization opportunities you should seriously consider." Chatham organized the papers. His body language gave away his nervousness, but he spoke with practiced confidence. "Liu, this house is an unproductive asset," he said, pointing to a document. "It's valued at over $440,000, but it doesn't generate any income." "Closets is my home," I replied. "You grew up here. Her lives here. Malarious." "Exactly. That's why it makes financial sense to transfer ownership now." Crier could have lifelong rights, but the property would be in my name, would help with future inheritance taxes. The coldness with which he described taking my home was unsettling, but I stayed composed. I needed him to keep talking. "Commentarius. I other investments?" I asked. "Pledged. That's where things get more complex," he said, adopting a technical tone. "You have too much diversification for someone your age. Underscore, Jen. You should consolidate everything into more conservative, easily managed instruments. Notice a proposal where all my stocks and bonds would be liquidated and transferred to a joint account he would manage for my benefit. Enenment. Álvaro, I said with a deliberately confused tone. This sounds so complicated. Submerge. Can you explain it more simply? Ragaz lit up. He thought he had found my weakness. That's why it's so important you let me help you, Dad. Unrestricted financial decisions are too complex for someone who isn't familiar with today's markets. Ragazesting, I no longer have the capacity to manage my own affairs? It's not a question of capacity, he replied quickly. It's a question of efficiency. Undermined, I have a financial background. Accompagn understands the real estate market. We can maximize the value of your estate in ways you couldn't on your own. It was the confession I needed. He had just admitted his plan was to take control of my finances under the pretense of my incompetence. And what if I oppose these changes? The question changed the whole dynamic. He tensed up. Dad, we hope it won't be necessary to resort to more formal measures. What kind of formal measures? There's the legal possibility of establishing a guardianship when an older person isn't in a position to make rational financial decisions for themselves. Guardian's the direct threat I had been waiting for. With the recorder on, Álvaro had just confessed that if I didn't voluntarily hand over my estate, they would have me declared legally incompetent. Have you consulted a lawyer about that? I asked, keeping my voice shaky. Preliminary advice, yes. Position isn't complicated when there's clear evidence of a decline in judgment. What evidence? Skeletal Álvaro opened another folder and showed me documents that took my breath away. There were photos of my house showing small messes in the garden. There were copies of my medical receipts where he had underlined visits for minor health issues. There was even a handwritten list of concerning behaviors, including repeating conversations and frequent forgetfulness. As you can see, he said, we've documented several indicators that could concern an independent medical evaluator. Unjan helped me with the documentation. Her professional expertise has been invaluable in presenting the information coherently. Punished, overwhelmed by the sophistication of the plan. They hadn't just decided to steal my estate. They had meticulously built a false case to legally justify their actions. Álvaro, I said, this is also overwhelming. Can I think about it for a few days? Of course, Dad. But it's important you don't take too long. Guangak's optimization has deadlines. What deadlines? Ideally, we should have everything formalized before the end of April. Nuding April? The exact date I had seen on his secret schedule. And what if, during these days, I decided to consult my own advisors? My question made him nervous. Clinging, I think it would be counterproductive to involve more people in what are intimate family decisions. Relics, but surely you wouldn't oppose me checking some details with my bank? The problem, he said cautiously, is that your bank might not fully understand the family context of these decisions. Consulted would create unnecessary confusion. Lest it was the final confirmation I needed. He didn't just fear me consulting with professionals. He specifically wanted to prevent my bank from verifying the fraudulent documents they had used to access my data. Understand, I said with feigned resignation. I guess I'll just trust your judgment like I always have. Abolish him, relax, thinking he had won. Dad, I want you to know we're doing this for your own good. You need protection, even if you don't see it yourself. Toi? Protection from what? Redskins, mostly. Too rural for your judgment to be gradually compromised. Slaughtered. It's better to anticipate those problems before they become irreversible. Those last words were the jewel of the entire recording. Álvaro had explicitly admitted that he considered my judgment compromised, providing perfect evidence of the falsity of his motives. When he left that night, I sat in the living room with a feeling of absolute victory. I had gotten him to confess his true intentions. I had recorded evidence of his threats, and I had confirmed every detail of their plan. He left, convinced he had intimidated me, but in reality, he had just given me the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy his plan. I called Sebastian Morales. Microscopic, he said. This is gold. With this confession, we can not only defend ourselves from any incapacitation attempt, but also file criminal charges for attempted fraud and coercion. Rounds. As I got ready for bed, I reflected on what I had accomplished in 3 weeks. I had gone from being a potential victim to having complete control. My estate was legally shielded. I had comprehensive evidence of their fraud. I had regained Dolores as an ally, and I now had the recorded confession that made any legal action against me impossible. I had achieved it all without them even suspecting. They still thought they were dealing with a confused, vulnerable old man, when in reality they had walked into a trap. Position. On Monday, April 6, I received a call that was a complete game changer. Gabriel Herrera, my private investigator, had uncovered information that surpassed my worst expectations. Forging Mr. Herrera, he said when we met, you need to sit down for this. Fleeing spread out photographs, bank statements, and phone call transcripts. Your daughter-in-law Silvia has been organizing this operation for longer than we thought. Jency? We found evidence she started researching your assets more than 6 months ago. Screenshots of online searches she had performed about guardianship proceedings and inheritance law. But most importantly, Gabriel continued, we discovered Silvia has significant debts she has been hiding from your son. What kind of debts? Legalize invested heavily in a failed real estate project. Unprotected, she owes more than $165,000 to several private investors. The payments were due in January, and her creditors are pressing hard. Everything made perfect sense. Silvia wasn't motivated by family concern or smart planning. She was desperate to pay off debts that had put her own solvency at risk. Does Álvaro know about these debts? I asked. Our ourselves say Silvia has kept him completely in the dark about her real financial situation. Gabriel then handed me the most shocking document, a transcript of a phone call between Silvia and one of her creditors. If I can't get access to those assets by May, Silvia had said, I'll have to declare bankruptcy. My father-in-law has $1 million that are just sitting there. He's an old man living with his wife, with no real capacity to manage all that wealth. Reading her words was like a punch to the gut. She had turned my family, my home, and my legacy into a business transaction to solve her own financial problems. Added, confiscated. Agüero isn't in the financial position he pretends to be. His consulting business has been losing clients. His income is down almost 40%. The full picture was coming into focus. This wasn't a carefully planned scheme for my well-being. It was a desperate operation by two people with serious money problems who had decided to use my wealth as a solution. That afternoon, I returned home to an unexpected surprise. My sister-in-law Esperanza had arrived just as she promised. She was sitting in the kitchen, talking to Dolores, and the tension between them was palpable. Emilio, Esperanza said, we need to talk together about what's going on. For the next 2 hours, Esperanza applied the pressure I had been unable to. As a younger but more determined sister, she got Dolores to confess details she had hidden from me. Álvaro told me if I didn't cooperate, he and Silvia would move far away and I would never see my grandchildren again, Dolores admitted through tears. What grandchildren? Esperanza asked sharply. They don't have kids. The ones they want to have in the future, Dolores mumbled. They wanted to start a family, but they needed financial stability first. Esperanza and I exchanged glances. He had used the promise of future grandchildren to emotionally manipulate his mother. Dolores, Esperanza said firmly, do you realize they are using your own dreams against you to rob your husband? That's when Dolores broke down completely. Sobbing, she confessed she had felt for weeks that something was terribly wrong, but was too scared to go against Álvaro. He also scared me when he said they could have Emilio declared incompetent, she whispered. I know your mind works perfectly fine, but he insisted it was just a precaution. Linebacker got up, indignant. Dolores, your son is planning to destroy his own father's life to solve money problems. How can you even consider supporting something like that? Dolores and I gained an unexpected ally. My wife was a victim of manipulation, just like I was. On Tuesday, April 7, I received a call from Sebastian Morales. Mr. Herrera, we've completed all the asset shielding. Your assets are now protected under a legal structure that makes unauthorized access impossible. What does that mean exactly? It means that even if they get a temporary declaration of incompetence, they can't touch any of your properties, bank accounts, or investments without a full legal proceeding that would take years. Sebastian had also looked into the lawyers Álvaro had consulted. They're good professionals, but they're working with incomplete and false information. When they find out their client lied about your mental capacity and family situation, they'll probably withdraw from the case. Washing Wednesday, I implemented the next phase of my strategy, the controlled confrontation. It was time for Álvaro to know that I knew everything, but without revealing the full extent of my countermeasures. I called him. "Killing Álvaro," I said calmly. "I think we should have a serious conversation about the future. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon?" "What do you want to talk about, Dad?" he asked cautiously. "You mentioned at dinner, Engerd. I think it's time you explained exactly what you have in mind." I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "Okay, I'll be there around 6. That night, with Dolores and Esperanza as witnesses, I discreetly set up a recording device in the living room. Everything Álvaro said would be on the record. On Thursday, as I waited for him, I went over all my advantages: full legal protection, evidence of his fraudulent activities, certification of my mental capacity, recovered allies, and information about Silvia's secret debts. And now, the ability to document any new lies or threats. When Álvaro arrived, he carried a folder of documents and a look of artificial determination. He sat in the same spot where I had taught him to read. "Dad," he began seriously, "Silvia and I have been studying your financial situation. Faroud, we believe there are important optimization opportunities you should seriously consider. Undermine the papers." His body language gave away his nervousness, but he spoke with practiced confidence. "This house is an unproductive asset," he said, pointing to a document. "It's valued at over $440,000, but it doesn't generate any income." "This house is my home," I replied. "Up here. Your mother lives here." Communicated. That's why it makes financial sense to transfer ownership now. You could have lifelong rights, but the property would be in my name. It would help with future inheritance taxes. The coldness with which he described Ling, but I stayed composed. I needed him to keep talking. "And my other investments?" I asked. "That's where things get more complex," he said, adopting a technical tone. "You have too much diversification for someone your age. I'll allocate everything into more conservative, easily managed instruments, where all my stocks and bonds would be liquidated and transferred to a joint account he would manage for my benefit." "Álvaro," I said, with a deliberately confused tone, "this sounds so complicated. Can you explain it more simply?" His eyes lit up. He thought he had found my weakness. "That's why it's so important you let me help you, Dad. These financial decisions are too complex for someone who isn't familiar with today's markets." "Are you suggesting I no longer have the capacity to manage my own affairs?" "Of capacity," he replied quickly. "Of efficiency. I have a financial background. Real estate market. We can maximize the value of your estate in ways you couldn't on your own." Allergies I needed. He had just admitted his plan was to take control of my finances under the pretense of my incompetence. And what if I oppose these changes? The question changed the whole dynamic. He tensed up. "Dad, we hope it won't be necessary to resort to more formal measures." "What kind of formal measures?" "There's the legal possibility of establishing a guardianship when an older person isn't in a position to make rational financial decisions for themselves." There was the direct threat I had been waiting for. With the recorder on, Álvaro had just confessed that if I didn't voluntarily hand over my estate, they would have me declared legally incompetent. "Have you consulted a lawyer about that?" I asked, keeping my voice shaky. "I've gotten preliminary advice, yes. The process isn't complicated when there's clear evidence of a decline in judgment." "What evidence?" Álvaro opened another folder and showed me documents that took my breath away. There were photos of my house showing small messes in the garden. There were copies of my medical receipts where he had underlined visits for minor health issues. There was even a handwritten list of concerning behaviors, including repeating conversations and frequent forgetfulness. "As you can see," he said, "we've documented several indicators that could concern an independent medical evaluator." Silvia helped me with the documentation. Her expertise has been invaluable in presenting the information coherently. I was overwhelmed by the sophistication of the plan. They hadn't just decided to steal my estate, they had meticulously built a false case to legally justify their actions. "Álvaro," I said, This is all so overwhelming. Can I think about it for a few days? But it's important you don't take too long. Tax optimization has deadlines. Ideally, we should have everything formalized before the end of April. The exact date I had seen on his secret schedule. Then what if, during these days, I decided to consult my own advisors? My question made him nervous. Dad, I think it would be counterproductive to involve more people in what are intimate family decisions. But surely you wouldn't oppose me checking some details with my bank. The problem, he said cautiously, is that your bank might not fully understand the family context of these decisions. They could create unnecessary confusion. Unleashed, it was the final confirmation I needed. He didn't just fear me consulting with professionals. He specifically wanted to prevent my bank from verifying the fraudulent documents they had used to access my data. I understand, I said with feigned resignation. I guess I'll just trust your judgment like I always have. I saw him relax, thinking he had won. Dad, I want you to know we're doing this for your own good. Blackmail, even if you don't see it yourself. What? From yourself, mostly. Legalize. It's natural for your judgment to be gradually compromised. Anticipate those problems before they become irreversible. Those last words were the courting. Álvaro had explicitly admitted that he considered my judgment compromised, providing perfect evidence of the falsity of his motives. When he left that night, I sat in the living room with a feeling of absolute victory. I had gotten him to confess his true intentions. I had recorded evidence of his threats, and I had confirmed every detail of their plan. He left convinced he had intimidated me, but in reality, he had just given me the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy his plan. I called Sebastian Morales. Mr. Herrera, he said, this is gold. With this confession, we can not only defend ourselves from any incapacitation attempt, but also file criminal charges for attempted fraud and coercion. Long 11, as I got ready for bed, I reflected on what I had accomplished in 3 weeks. I had gone from being a potential victim to having complete control. My estate was legally shielded. I had comprehensive evidence of their fraud. I had regained Dolores as an ally, and I now had the recorded confession that made any legal action against me impossible. I had achieved it all without them even suspecting. They still thought they were dealing with a confused, vulnerable old man, when in reality, they had walked into a trap. On Friday, April 10, I decided it was time to move from a silent defense to a calculated offense. For 3 weeks, I had gathered information, built up protections, and set traps. Now it was time to use all that to my advantage. My first step was to contact Silvia's creditors. Gabriel Herrera had given me their information. I called Nicholas Romero, the main creditor, who had invested $88,000 in Silvia's failed project. Mr. Romero, I said, I'm Emilio Herrera, Silvia Moreno's father-in-law. I think you should know my daughter-in-law is trying to fraudulently access my assets to cover her debts to you. He confirmed that Silvia had repeatedly promised him she would have access to significant family resources before the end of April, the payment deadline. Mr. Herrera, are you willing to guarantee your daughter-in-law's debts? He asked. Projectile, absolutely not, I said. In fact, I recommend you carefully review any document she presents to you. It's highly likely they are forgeries. After I hung up, I knew I had planted the seed of outside pressure that would dramatically complicate Silvia's plans. Her creditors would now investigate her promises more deeply, and any attempt to use fraudulent documents would be detected immediately. My second action was even more direct. I went to the office of the lawyer Rodrigo Sanchez, who had been advising Álvaro. Mr. Sanchez, I said, take Emilio Herrera. And I understand my son has been consulting you about my supposed mental incompetence. The lawyer's expression was a mixture of shock and discomfort. Mr. Herrera, I can't discuss other clients' cases. You don't need to discuss anything, I replied calmly. You just need to see this. I handed him the full report from Dr. Jimenez, certifying my perfect cognitive ability, along with a copy of the transcribed recording of my conversation with Álvaro. Mr. Sanchez, my son has systematically lied to you about my mental state. I suggest you carefully review any documentation he's provided you, because much of it may be falsified evidence. He read the documents with a cern. Mr. Herrera, if this is true, it presents a serious ethical problem with the representation I was asked for. I assure you it's completely true. Concentrates. And I'll tell you now that any legal proceeding based on false information will be vigorously challenged with every legal tool available. Unset left his office. I knew Álvaro had lost his main legal advisor. No responsible lawyer would continue a case knowing their client had deliberately provided false information. On Monday, April 13, I implemented the third phase of my counterattack: financial exposure. I contacted Álvaro's boss at the consulting firm where he worked. Mr. Ibáñez, I said to Carlos Ibáñez over the phone, "Blindness, I'm the father of Álvaro Herrera, one of your consultants. Ambigu about a situation that could affect your company's professional reputation. Confiscated that Álvaro had been using company time to consult lawyers and plan a fraudulent financial operation. I also mentioned he had used office resources to falsify documents. Mr. Herrera, these are very serious accusations. Documentation of all his activities over the last 3 months," I said. "I'm willing to provide it if you decide to investigate your employees' behavior." Bullied. That conversation achieved exactly what I wanted: to create professional pressure on Álvaro just when he most needed job stability to face the financial problems ahead. Accompagné, Tuesday, I received a furious call from Silvia. "Emilio," she yelled, "what did you say to Nicolas Romero? And additional guarantees and threatening to sue for fraud. I just told him the truth, Silvia. And Chefery, that I have no intention of backing up debts you incurred without consulting me. And Chefery, punished. Those aren't just my debts. And Chefery, forging family investments that could benefit all of us. Enge, and family investments? And Chefery, when exactly did you consult me about those investments before you made them?" And Chefery blinked. The silence that followed was telling. Besides, I continued, I've informed all my financial advisors about your attempts to fraudulently access my resources. Any document you present with my supposed authorization will be scrutinized thoroughly. You can't do this to us. We're your family. Family doesn't steal, Silvia. Family doesn't falsify documents. Family doesn't plan to declare their patriarch incompetent to solve their own financial problems. I hung up, satisfied that I had created panic in the enemy camp. The outside pressures I had set in motion were now converging, dramatically complicating their ability to execute their original plan. On Wednesday night, Álvaro showed up at my door unannounced. He looked disheveled and nervous. "Dad, we need to talk urgently." "Disrig what, son?" "About the calls you've been making." "Been telling people." "What calls?" "Prohibity, dumb." "Psychologists. You know you've been deliberately sabotaging our plans." Since it was fascinating to completely strip away his facade of filial concern. He was now openly talking about our plans without trying to disguise his true intentions. "Álvaro," I said, "rebuiltly been verifying information with professionals I've known for years. Does that bother you?" "Of course it bothers me. You're deliberately complicating a situation that could be resolved simply. Simple for whom? For everyone? Father, including me? Especially for you. Don't you understand we're trying to protect you from yourself?" That phrase was the climax of the confrontation. He had fully revealed his true mindset. He genuinely believed he had the right to take control of my life and wealth against my will, justifying it as protection. "Álvaro," I said with the coldest voice I could muster, "time you understand something fundamental. I don't need your protection. What I need is for you to respect my decisions and my autonomy. Your autonomy is compromised. Frontlinal decisions about complex financial matters. According to whom? According to anyone who objectively observes your recent behavior. Are you talking about the behavior of carefully investigating the plans you designed for my estate without my consultation? Or the behavior of verifying the legality of documents with my signature on them, but without my authorization?" The shock on Álvaro's face told me he finally understood that I knew everything. "Dad, how long have you known?" Familiarity, Alvaro, the beginning, Alvaro. Proportional when you spoke those cruel words. Ramifications, that was the first time in my life I truly paid attention to who you had become. I watched his whole strategy crumble. Their months of planning were disintegrating because they had completely underestimated me. When he left that night, defeated and desperate, I knew I had won. The counterattack had been a complete success. The final phase of my plan was about to begin. The following days brought a desperate escalation from Álvaro and Silvia that confirmed the wisdom of my strategy. When people lose control of a situation they thought they dominated, they make mistakes that reveal their true nature. On Thursday, April 16, Dolores received a call that changed her perspective forever. Álvaro contacted her with a proposal that left me speechless when she told me about it. "Emilio," she said, trembling, "Álvaro asked me to sign a document declaring that I've observed mental decline in you." "What did you say?" Unfor told him it was completely false, but he insisted it was just a formality to protect the family. "Mabani," he said, "Mom, you can do this the easy way or the hard way." Mean threat to his own mother marked a point of no return. Álvaro had crossed the line from emotional manipulation to outright coercion. Tage also told me something that scared me, Dolores continued. He mentioned they had researched nursing homes in the area just in case things got complicated. The words sent a shiver down my spine. They hadn't just planned to steal my estate, they had considered institutionalizing me. On Friday, I received an unexpected visit from Trina, Dolores's cousin, who worked for the city government. "Emilio," she said, "Silvia was in my office yesterday asking about procedures for death certificates and post-mortem transfers." "Death certificates?" She said it was for a client, but when I asked for specific details, she got really nervous. Then she asked me about the requirements for validating wills. The information was deeply disturbing. Silvia hadn't just contemplated declaring me incompetent. She had researched procedures related to my death. Trina, did it sound like she had a specific case in mind? Definitely. Includio. Sentient properties valued at several $100,000 and direct heirs who wanted to speed up the process. Complied in that moment that Silvia had considered scenarios that went far beyond simple theft. That night, I called an emergency meeting with Sebastian Morales. "Mr. Herrera," he said, "killing this has gone beyond a simple attempt at fraud. We're talking about coercion, family threats, and possibly conspiracy to commit serious crimes. It's time to involve the authorities." Farudgo. But I had a different strategy in mind. "Sebastian," I said, "prepare all the legal documentation, but don't file it yet. I want to use this information as leverage for a final resolution." On Saturday morning, my phone rang with the call I had been waiting for. It was Álvaro, and his voice was filled with a new desperation. "Accompaño, I need to talk to you immediately." "It's urgent." "What's the urgency?" I asked. "Fallback. Silvia's creditors are taking legal action. Her car and are threatening to sue her for fraud. She says you deliberately sabotaged the negotiations." My strategy of financial pressure had worked. She was panicking. "Dad," he pleaded, "Silvia is desperate, talking about options that scare me." "Wilmington, what options?" The phone. "Turbulence. Come home. Silvia says if we don't fix this today, she'll do something we'll all regret." Ill confirmed that my pressure strategy had worked exactly as planned. That afternoon, I went to their house. The scene I found was worse than I expected. Silvia was on the couch, surrounded by legal documents, her eyes red and puffy, looking completely broken. "Emilio," she said, "I need you to understand this wasn't personal." "Oh no? It was just a practical solution to a temporary problem?" I asked. "The real estate project would have worked if it wasn't for the market crisis. I short-term capital to avoid bankruptcy and Kreskins. So you decided my estate was the solution? And when I didn't have any alternatives? And sure, the banks rejected all my loans. And Crace. Private investors demanded guarantees I couldn't provide. One quote, decided to forge my signature and conspire to have me declared incompetent. End quote. Álvaro stared at the floor, unable to defend the indefensible. "Criaria," I continued, And they to me exactly what desperate options you've been considering. And Crace, my cousin Trina told me about your visit to City Hall, asking about death certificates and succession processes. End quote, would you care to explain that? End quote. End quote. System. The look of horror that crossed Álvaro's face confirmed he had been in the dark about that. Silvia, he yelled, you told me you were just researching normal legal options. Ensure that all possibilities, she shot back defensively. I needed to understand the legal landscape completely. End quote. Escape of my death? I asked directly. And Crace, the legal landscape of my death? It wasn't that. In 41, it was just general information. Isiber, her inability to hold my gaze told me everything. She had considered scenarios far beyond simple theft. Álvaro, I said to my son, restrained, do you realize how far this woman has led you? Do you understand you took part in a conspiracy that could have ended in ways I don't even want to imagine? Álvaro covered his face with his hands. Dad, I thought we were doing the right thing for the family. Orging documents is the right thing? Oyers is the right thing? Threatening your own mother is the right thing? I didn't know it had gone that far, he screamed, looking at Silvia. You told me it was just preventative financial planning. Them revealed something fundamental. Álvaro had been manipulated by Silvia as much as I had. She had gradually escalated the conspiracy, involving him step by step, without ever revealing the full scope of her intentions. When I left that house, I had a new certainty. Álvaro was more a victim than a villain in this story. Silvia had been the true architect, using my son as a tool to execute her desperate plan. On Sunday, April 19, I received the call I had been waiting for. It was Álvaro, and his voice was completely broken. Dad, I need to see you alone. Ulu, without Silvia. Please, where can we meet? In the park, I said. /blue, where I taught you to ride a bike. The reference to that place, so full of childhood memories, told me something fundamental had changed. I found him on the same bench we used to share, but the man in front of me was emotionally destroyed. Muhavs, he began. Silvia lied to me about everything. Foreclosure. What did you find out? After you left, we had a terrible fight. Synchronized demanded she explain about the death certificates. She denied it at first, but when I pressed her, she confessed. She told me she had considered scenarios where your natural death would solve all our financial problems. Hearing those words from my own son filled me with a mixture of horror and relief. Horror at the lengths Silvia had gone to, and relief that Álvaro had finally seen her true nature. Waged, what else did she tell you? I asked. That the debts are much worse than she said. View it's more than $330,000. She's been forging documents for months, not just yours, but other real estate clients too. She even admitted to talking to a corrupt doctor willing to sign a fake medical certificate for $22,000. Did you know any of this? I asked. Meliors? No, I swear I didn't. Timber, I really thought we were just helping you with financial planning. And when she talked about guardianship, she said it was just a precaution to avoid future problems. Flushing genuine tears in my son's eyes. Dad, I realized I've been living with a stranger. I'm married doesn't exist, Sen Reuters. She's a professional manipulator who used me to get to you. How do you feel about all this? Embarrassed, furious, bungalow, but most of all, terrified to think how far it could have gone if you hadn't found out in time. Minimize continued for over 2 hours. Álvaro told me details that my private investigator hadn't even discovered. Silvia had been embezzling commissions from her own company and using confidential information to defraud investors. Crimson, he said finally, can you ever forgive me? The question went straight to my heart. For weeks, I had been furious with him. I had planned my revenge. I had enjoyed watching him suffer the consequences. But sitting there, seeing a broken man realize he had been manipulated by the person he trusted most, my perspective changed completely. Álvaro, forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's something you give. And it's already yours. Atar, how can you say that after everything I put you through? Because you're still my son, windshield. And because now I understand that the real enemy was never you. That night, Álvaro came home with me and confessed the whole truth to Dolores. My wife cried for hours, not only from the relief of knowing her son wasn't a monster, but from the pain of understanding how they had all been manipulated. On Monday morning, Álvaro made the bravest decision of all. He went to the San Diego Police Department to formally report Silvia for every crime he had discovered. He told the officer, "Need to file a report against my wife for forgery, attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit crimes against my father." His report, combined with all the evidence I had collected, created an overwhelming criminal case against Silvia. That afternoon, the police executed a search warrant at their house and at Silvia's office. What they found exceeded all our expectations. Files on multiple scams, forged documents, and detailed plans to defraud not just our family, but several other clients. On Tuesday, Silvia was arrested at her office. The charges included aggravated fraud, forgery of public documents, and criminal conspiracy. The prosecutor estimated the sentences could add up to 15 years. When Álvaro called me to tell me about the arrest, his voice was different. For the first time in months, he sounded like the son I remembered. "Dad, I want you to know something important. Punished. Deep down, I always knew something was wrong. Turbulence. But I was afraid to admit it because it would mean my marriage was a lie. My life was a lie. Now I'd rather live with the painful truth than a comfortable lie. Alphabetical, and the truth is, I almost destroyed the most important person in my life for someone who never truly loved me." May we had dinner together for the first time since that fateful Sunday, but the atmosphere was completely different. Dolores had prepared paella, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a genuine smile on my son's face. "Dad," he said as we were finishing dinner, "I need to tell you something. I thought I was protecting you. Congest the one protecting all of us. You discovered the truth, you developed a strategy, and you saved us from a catastrophe we didn't even see coming. I just did what any father would do," I said. "No, Dad." Stabilized, you did what only someone with your experience, your intelligence, and your love for family could have done. You saved us from ourselves. As I listened, I realized I had achieved something more important than protecting my estate. I had gotten my son back and saved my family from total destruction. The war was over, but the scars would take time to heal. However, for the first time in weeks, I knew we would heal together as a real family, without lies or manipulation. The final chapter of our story was about to be written, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what would come next. 6 months after Silvia's arrest, my life had found a balance I never could have imagined. It was October, and as I watched the golden leaves fall, I reflected on everything we had been through. Silvia's trial had concluded in September with a 12-year prison sentence. The charges for multiple frauds, forgery, and criminal conspiracy had been irrefutable. But the most satisfying part wasn't seeing her pay for her crimes. It was witnessing how the truth had freed my family from her lies. Álvaro had filed for divorce immediately after the arrest. The process was quick. He had gradually regained his peace of mind, though the emotional scars would take years to heal. "Dad," he told me a few weeks ago, "every day I discover more things she manipulated in our relationship. Decisions I thought were mine, opinions I thought I had formed independently. Discover how much of your own life wasn't truly yours." The rebuilding process has been gradual and constant. He sold the house he shared with Silvia and rented a small apartment near ours. Sundays were once again family days, but with a completely different dynamic based on honesty and mutual respect. Reserved her own transformation. The guilt of being an unwitting accomplice had led her to therapy. With professional help, she learned to recognize the manipulation they had used against her and developed a new emotional strength. "Emilio," she confessed one evening, "prior years of marriage, I thought I knew you completely. Bosbany, but these last few months showed me parts of your character I had never seen. Freeze's handled this crisis was extraordinary. I just did what I had to do to protect our family," I said. Alphabetical. "No, you did so much more than that. I was hysterical. You thought strategically when we were reacting emotionally. And most importantly, you never lost your compassion for Álvaro. even when you thought he was your enemy. Funshion, my relationship with my sister Amelia, had also grown stronger. Her help during the most difficult moments had been invaluable. I had regained not only my immediate family but family connections that had been dormant for years. My professional relationship with Sebastian Morales had evolved into a genuine friendship. The asset shielding we had implemented was still active, not out of mistrust, but as a preventative measure against any future external threat. Mr. Herrera, Sebastian told me at our last meeting, become a model study in my office. Ragashan of legal protection, meticulous investigation, and strategic patience was exemplary. Nenchal outcome had an unexpectedly positive ending. The assets Silvia had stolen from other clients were partially recovered thanks to our investigation. As a reward for providing crucial evidence, I received a significant financial settlement. I decided to donate it entirely to a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth. If anything good can come of this experience, I told Álvaro, it's that other young people have a genuine opportunity to build honest lives. The biggest change was in my own perspective. For 67 years, I had built my identity around being a provider and a protector. The crisis had shown me that those roles don't disappear with age, they simply evolve. Prosecute all this, I reflected during a recent family dinner. I thought aging meant gradually becoming more dependent. Now I understand that accumulated experience can be the most powerful weapon we have against those who try to take advantage of us. Álvaro had found a new professional purpose. He had left his consulting job and now specializes in advising families on fraud prevention. His painful personal experience gave him a unique credibility. Dad, every week I get calls from older people who suspect their relatives are plotting something against them. Being able to use what I learned from you to help them makes me feel like all that pain was for something positive. Squeeze visible change was in the atmosphere of our Sunday dinners. There were no more hidden tensions, no more forced conversations, no more ulterior motives. Álvaro brought desserts from different bakeries. Dolores experimented with new recipes, and I told stories from my business years that I had never shared before. Turbulence, what I value most about these Sundays? Álvaro asked me a few weeks ago. What? Time and years we all say exactly what we think. Patriotism. There are no hidden agendas, no manipulation, no fear. Just a real family, having real conversations. Reluctance lesson I had learned was about the importance of being vigilant without losing the capacity to love. For decades, I had trusted my family blindly, assuming that love guaranteed loyalty. Now, I understood that true love includes the responsibility to protect those you love, even from themselves. One afternoon, as I was organizing papers at my desk, I found the notebook where I had first documented all the evidence of the conspiracy. I reread my notes from those first weeks of investigation and was surprised to remember the fear and confusion I had felt. If I could send a message to that man in March, I thought, I would tell him to trust his gut, to not underestimate his own abilities, and to remember that life experience is the most valuable resource we have. Minimized at dinner, I decided to share one final thought with my family. Álvaro, Dolores, manifest I want you to know something important. Janvier. These last few months have been the most difficult of my life, but they were also the most revealing. They taught me that true family strength doesn't come from avoiding conflict, but from facing it together with total honesty. Mean, Dolores asked. I'm not afraid of getting older anymore. Throughout this crisis, I proved to myself, as much as to you, that age hasn't weakened me. It's refined me. Flushing of experience was a tool I used to protect what I love most. Álvaro raised his wine glass. To Dad, he said, wisdom isn't just knowing what to do, but when and how to do it without losing your soul in the process. As we toasted that night, looking toward a future that no longer scared me, I knew I had achieved something more valuable than protecting my estate. I had transformed a devastating betrayal into an opportunity to build a stronger, more authentic family. The story had ended, but life would continue. And for the first time in decades, I was excited to see what came next.